guys, what is going on? This is Matt with the Existential Man podcast, and thank you for tuning in. Today, I have a great episode for you. I've got an interview with a wonderful man. His name is Jack Kammer. Jack has got a master's in social work and has years of experience that we hope to glean from him about some of the social issues and gender issues that specifically deal with men and some of the issues we deal with on our day-to-day life. So guys, if you want to learn a little bit more about what Jack has to offer and maybe help us come up with some solutions to make this better, stay tuned. All right. Hey, Jack, how's it going? Thanks for joining us today.
And I'm doing well. I'm on vacation. And this is the high point of my vacation, talking to you, Matt.
I'm so glad. I'm so honored that you're here. As I said before,
Could you bring me a gin and tonic, please?
What's that?
Could you bring me a gin and tonic, please?
I will get right on that for sure. I will definitely get on that. Real quick, though, I want to point out some things that I didn't get to in the intro. So, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen that are listening, Jack is, as I said before, he has got a master's in social work. Jack has been working in the field of gender dynamics and social issues related to men since 1985. He's written over 50 published articles for different publications, including the Baltimore Sun, New York Daily News, Playboy Magazine, and other notable publications. He's got 3 books out, and those books, one of them it's called Heroes of the Blue Sky Rebellion, How You and Other Young Men Can Claim All the Happiness in the World. Another one is If Men Have All the Power, How Come Women Make the Rules? And the last one is Goodwill Toward Men, Women Talking Candidly About the Balance of Power Between the Sexes. Jack's recent work, he's done some things with the Prison Coalition? Now,
I worked for the National Fatherhood Initiative, teaching prison systems around the country how to run a program for incarcerated fathers.
Okay. So I did get that a little bit wrong, but thank you for the clarification.
That's all right.
But let's just be honest. You've got a ton of knowledge, research, and information and insights that you can bring to some of us out here in the land of the existential man. Is there anything that you'd like to add before we get started?
I would like to add this, just a clarification. I got into social work late in my life. Actually, social work followed rather than led my interest and my understanding of the importance of the gender issues of men and boys. I left my full-time job in 2005, went back to school to get the MBA, MSW. And I did that because I was already committed to the idea that there are lots of important social issues that result from the fact that the social issues of men and boys are really not very much attention to. And social work is one of the worst offenders, in my view. So after I got the social work degree in 2005, I worked a couple of gigs. One is I was a jail guard at the Baltimore City Jail. I was a parole and probation agent in Central Baltimore. I did the National Fatherhood Initiative thing. And then after that, right before I retired, I tried to start an agency called Working Well with Men. And the idea was that I would provide tools and training to the social work profession to help men give and get all the love they can. And I didn't have any takers. The social work just really is not very interesting.
Okay. I don't know. I think social work and how it relates to other individuals, obviously I guess that's the premise of it. But some of the things that it really, I guess, do you find with your experience in social work that it is would you say that it is equal and fair opportunity for all people involved, or do you find that there is general?
I would say there's a lot of anti-male bias in social work. Lots and lots of anti-male bias in social work. Now, I got to make clear that social work is a very broad field, and social workers do a lot of stuff. And there were lots of good social workers who are working very hard to help returning veterans with their PTSD, for instance. But the particular segment of social work that I find most disappointing is the practice of working with families, trying to strengthen families, how to help with parenting issues, how to help children. And men and fathers are pretty much just ignored. And that's the best of it, because if they're not ignored, they're often blamed.
I have a little bit of experience with that. And I know a couple of fathers who listen to this podcast that have some experience with that as well. So I think at least the general consensus would be that we probably agree that even my wife and I were talking about this the other day. And one of the things that we discussed was that men are the most discriminated against class when it comes to the legal system in general. So we are more likely to serve a longer time for a same crime. When it comes to family and divorce court, we are basically treated as second-class citizens. So all things being equal, we generally tend to get the hammer.
Yeah, things are not equal. Basically it. Here's the point that I'd like to make about social work's bias. We have a huge effort in this country to get more women involved in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. That's diversity. We need more women in STEM. The importance of diversity. Okay, let me think about that. So if an engineering firm is building a bridge, there might be some value in particular that a woman can provide as to how the bridge ought to be designed, or maybe what shape it should take. But the actual fundamental structure of the bridge is going to be based on engineering principles, which are really not all that open to subjective argumentation or discussion. But when we get to social work, which is about 87% female, there is no call, no program to get more men involved in social work. Even though if there is a need to have women talking about how to build bridges, we have at least as much importance in having men involved in how to build families. Doesn't it seem obvious that social work really is not interested in pursuing that, because families are the female domain, and they don't want to share it with men any more than men wanted to share the economic domain with women. And that's the sad fact, but it's true. Social work talks about every third word out of a social worker's mouth is diversity. But when it comes to men in social work, they'll have excuses. Oh, men don't want to do it, or it doesn't pay enough. All of those excuses. They're not trying. That's basically what it gets down to. They don't want to try. It's a sad thing.
What, that men don't want to try, or that women don't?
That social work doesn't really want to welcome men into the profession. There is the accreditation body for social work schools is called CSWE, the Council on Social Work Education. The Council on Social Work Education every year offers a feminist scholarship award. A feminist scholarship award. This is social work, which is supposed to be celebrating diversity and listening to everybody's point of view. But the point of view we're really going to listen to is the feminist point of view. It's mind-boggling, but it's true.
Yeah, I think
it's got to stop.
And I think the thing that the first point you just made in that whole explanation, which really delves into a subject that I don't know a ton about, being in social work, but I do know that to start a family, it takes both a man and a woman to create the miracle of birth. And so to not value the opinion of men when it comes to dealing with building and helping families grow and progress and get better from a perspective of an institutional ideology, I feel like that is way far off base.
I agree. I agree. Feminism 40, 50, 60 years ago made a big point about how women were demeaned and disregarded. Here we are today, and fathers are demeaned and disregarded. You will find actual supposed scholars sort of trying to downplay the fact that fathers are valuable and important to kids, and also valuable and important to women in happy marriages. But man doesn't have to be in a happy marriage to be valuable and important to his kids.
No. He just needs to provide the same support that he would regardless. And I'm not talking about financial support.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Like,
Yeah.
and let's be real. I mean, okay. So one of the things that I was doing some research after you and I talked, and I really liked I read a bunch of your articles, but the one that got me was the excerpt that you wrote in regards to your last book.
Yeah.
About the lace curtain.
Yeah. Should I tell that? It's a pretty long story. So let me hear you recap it. I'd like to know the impression that article made on you.
I'll be honest. I don't remember all the names involved, but I can put together the gist of it. After you wrote the book, you had sat down for an interview with this, I guess, a book reviewer from, was it the Baltimore Sun?
Yeah, she wasn't a book reviewer, but she's just the general reporter. Her name was Jean Marbella.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And you had sat down for an interview about the book and the premise of the book, and she had read it, and she basically took great offense to what was said in there. She took great exception to most of what it had to say. And the gist that I got of that part of the story was that she surmised the book down to basically two things. Was number one, that you implied in some way, shape, or form that if you didn't agree with the book, that you're wrong. And number two, that while there is a philosophical difference between men and women, when it comes down to the reality of it, there isn't really any difference, is what I gathered from what your explanation was. And please correct me if I'm wrong. I may have read that completely incorrectly, but
it's pretty close. Let's talk. Let's tell your audience a little bit about the book itself, so we'll have an idea of what Jean Marbella had so much trouble with. It was a book called Goodwill Toward Men, as you said. The subtitle was "Women Talk Candidly About the Balance of Power Between the Sexes." And I interviewed 22 women, most of whom identified as feminists. And this was back in 1993. I did the interview. Feminism didn't mean what it means today. These were older generation feminists. And these were feminists who believed in that funny thing called equality. And they were very adamant about the fact that equality had to be equal, had to go both ways. That's what the book was about. When Jean Marbella came over to my apartment for the interview, I said, "Jean, what did you think of the book?" She said, "Oh, I had a lot of problems with it. To me, it was just a lot of generalizations. Men this, women that. Men this, women that. You can't make generalizations." And I said, "Jean, it's interesting. If I were to say to you, men make more money than women, would you object to that?" And she would say, "No, men do make more money than women." And I said, "But not all men make more money than all women. So perhaps the problem with my book isn't with the fact that it makes generalizations, but rather with the facts that it makes generalizations about." And she didn't handle that very well. She got agitated.
I imagine not. Nobody likes being called out.
Yeah.
Let's face it. I don't even like being called out, but nobody likes being called out.
So wouldn't it have been great if she had written an article saying, "I got called out on my sexism.
Yeah.
I got called out on my feminism and how my feminism is really pretty biased," and wrote an article about that. That would have been great. And I really would have respected her for that. Yeah. But what did they do? What did she and her editor do? They just killed the story. Didn't bother writing anything about my book, which is the worst thing they could do for it. So
press is no press, but even
Yeah.
bad press is still press.
Yeah,
So
at least some people would
create the
think, "Hey,
conversation around it.
she didn't like the book, but I think I'd love it. Let me buy this
Yeah.
book."
Yeah, and then interestingly enough, I think I read, if I remember correctly, I read even further in that there was something about how
There was
you
something about how if I didn't agree, if anybody who didn't agree with my book was wrong. So
Right.
that's one of the pieces you mentioned. I had no idea what she was talking about until a little later, and I realized that it was probably the section of the introduction where I said, this book is not about telling the whole story of what's going on between men and women.
Right.
So don't expect this book to be perfectly balanced. This is
Yeah.
a book that tells the missing half of the story, not just about men's advantages as men and
Mhm.
women's disadvantages as women, which is all feminism talks about.
Right.
It's about the other half of the story. This book will talk about, and it will talk with good-hearted women with goodwill toward men who are willing, ready, and able to talk about the disadvantages that men have as men and the advantages that
Yeah.
women have as women. And so what I said in the introduction about that fact was, this isn't a book that's supposed to tell the whole story. I'm not trying to tell the whole story. I'm trying to tell the missing piece. And she
Right.
took
And
that to mean that I think, I'm not exactly sure. It was a long time ago. And it's hard to know exactly what she was thinking with that complaint. I think that's probably what she was objecting to. It's bogus.
Yeah.
But that's what she was objecting to.
I absolutely agree. I think what you said sums it up perfectly. Is, if you go find a writer or an author who writes a book on behalf of women regarding the issues at play in most women's lives on a day-to-day basis, do you expect them to write about the issues in men's lives equally and give them equal justice? No, you wouldn't, but that would be acceptable. But so for a man to write what you wrote, and the crazy part that gets me is that it's not even like this was just opinion from you. These were actual interviews done with actual women who had this to say about the whole situation. So that's the part that gets me. But look, ultimately, I think regardless of the bad press or the negative reviews or people saying this, that, or the other, there are still some issues that you and I talked about. We've got some issues. Now, I guess the next step is, what do we do about it? We've talked about social work being a completely or a relatively biased industry. We've talked about the legal system being a relatively biased organization against men. Education, a similar story, relatively biased against men. Very few teachers anymore in primary and secondary school are men. You have some higher education, college professors and beyond that are quite a bit of those are men. But then on the flip side, you've got significantly fewer men in college or enrolling and graduating college than women at significantly lower rates than they were even just a decade ago. So just those three issues all together, those are three large pieces of everyday society. So now, I guess ultimately, I want to play devil's advocate here for just a second and say, number one, why is that a problem for us as men? Like, we've chosen these paths. We choose not to go to college. We choose not to be teachers. We choose not to be social workers. So why is this such an issue?
Imagine if we turned that around 50 years ago and said to women, look, the reason you're not lawyers is because you choose not to be lawyers. The reason you're not doctors is because you choose not to go to medical school. Please. There's obstacles, there's disincentives, there's discouragement, there's gender expectations, gender biases. If you want to be a social worker, you gotta have pretty thick skin as a man, because every day you're going to hear about the oppressive patriarchy. There are lots of disincentives for men to get
Okay.
and seek fairness and equal treatment. It's a very deep and complicated situation, and it's very subtle. It's very sophisticated. When men wanted to keep women out of the male domain, what we did was we made rules and laws, and they
Mhm.
worked until somebody came along and said, "Nope, you're not going to do that anymore." We couldn't pretend that they didn't exist because they were
Yeah.
obvious for everyone to see. But when women want to keep men out of a place of fairness, all they got to do is paint it pink. Look, they paint it pink, and we don't want to have anything to do with it. Now,
Yeah.
is that because we don't want to have anything to do with these good things that are painted pink? Or is it because we get the message from very early on that men don't do pink? No, we do green. We make money and we
Yeah.
kick ass and we compete and we fight and we don't really think much about our feelings and our emotions and our mental health or our physical health. We don't really think about the fact that we die 6.5 years younger. We don't go to the doctor very often because if we do that, we're taking time off of work. And that means
Right.
we're going to earn less money. And all of
Mhm.
these things,
Yeah.
bazillions of them, zillions of legal influences like that
Right.
operate against us. And so what operates against us isn't a big fat law that a few men can change
Yeah.
if they want to. What men are operating against, or what operates against us, is a bazillion tiny little influences. And they are not all of our making by any means.
Now, okay, so and I agree with you. They are not all of our making. And this is one of the things that I kind of stress. I stress to my listeners, I stress to myself, and it's something that I focus on it. And I have to remind myself on a constant basis. Control what you can control, forget about the rest. It will work out the way that it's going to work out, and you just got to let it be. So, what parts of this can we control? Because, like I said, I know that these influences, a lot of them are not of our creation. Some of them are influences that are from very young that we don't even realize the source of the influence. So, how do we as men change that dynamic to make it more or to reduce the power of those influences from such a young age? I know we talked about some things like education. It is primarily a female dominated sphere, if you will. And obviously each person puts their own influence and bias into what they teach another person. And so if you've got a primarily female dominated education system, I would imagine, and as have studies have shown, a lot of the things that have allowed men and boys to flourish in education are going by the wayside. Kinesthetic learning, that tactile, feel it, touch it, learn it kind of thing, wood shop, auto shop, metal shop, all the stuff that men used to be the predominantly male classrooms, because it was just the kind of stuff that we were into, or most men were into. That's all going away. And if that is our large part of our influence and influential sphere as we're growing up with the education system the way that it is, and we know that the barrier to entry for men in the education system, it's not necessarily the barrier to entry is a problem, but the social stigmas that go along with a male teacher, especially in the primary and secondary education spheres. What do we do about that? How do we fix that?
The most important thing I think we need as men at the start of what might one day become an actual men's movement, most important thing is a story, a counter narrative. The narrative that women started telling 60 years ago was that they were oppressed and men were their oppressors. And all of the good things in life were owned and dominated by men, and women had nothing valuable or worthwhile to help make them happy. They were oppressed and men were their oppressors. And the things that they wanted an equal share of were like a skyscraper, a huge office building. Women wanted access to business and careers, and they were right to point that out. What men need isn't to keep women out of the skyscraper, the office buildings. What men need is access, full and equal access to the building that women have controlled. Women didn't have an 80-story skyscraper. What women have is a 4-level convention center that covers 18 acres.
Okay.
And a lot of important things happen in that convention center. And men need equal access to that kind of influence and power. And that's the kind of influence and power that sort of determines a lot of important things in our society.
Yeah.
Just mores, families, how families are run, how schools are run. Women are very influential in lots of little ways, and I say little in quotes.
Yeah.
And men are influential in a lot of big ways, and I put that in quotes. But the dynamic that men, or the power structure that men are involved in, is very stratified. There are a few men who have a lot of power.
Yes.
Most men are at the bottom of this pyramid and have very little power. Very little power. But if you look at the female power structure, if you think of it as a convention center, there's not a hierarchy there. Everybody's running around, buzzing around and talking to each other and having fun and exchanging ideas and forming committees and making things happen.
Yeah.
And all of those participants in the convention center, the average of those is not hugely powerful. There aren't hugely powerful women at that convention center, but there were also not hugely powerless women in that convention center. A woman who is the mother of a family or the mother of children is the queen of a small domain. It's a small domain, but she is the queen.
Yes.
And women don't want to give that up. They don't want to. They don't want to have some man pretending to be some king. I'm the mother. I'm the mother. You probably heard women say that. I'm the mother, which is basically a way of saying, and you're only the father. You know what? So what? That is the narrative that we need to tell. That we understand your point of view. Yes, feminism said some good things, but feminism doesn't know everything.
Right.
And 60 years ago, instead of coming to men and picketing us and demanding that we share what we have with you, demanding it would have been a lot healthier to do what you pretend to be all about, which is to actually listen and share feelings and look for the win-win and collaborate and be nice. It would have been great if women had said, hey guys, we're not really too happy with our lives over here. We like being mothers and we like taking care of the house. Not all the time. Could we maybe work out a deal so that we have equal access to careers and make our own money? Could we work out a deal? Is there anything that you guys would like to change on your side? That question was never asked. It should have been asked.
That's true.
And it's now very hard to ask it because women don't want to hear it. They don't really strategically have to hear it because they have huge political power these days. But if they had asked that question, I think a lot of men would have said, really? You want to hear how we'd like to change our lives? And I think a lot of men would have said, get up at 5:30 in the morning and getting on the train for an hour to ride into the city, to go up into this skyscraper to work at a job I really hate. And then coming home all late at night, tired and exhausted and really feeling like I'm a stranger to my kids. And all the while feeling pressure because you know what? No matter how much money I make, is there ever really enough? Do I ever
Yeah.
really make enough money? Or would it always be better if I made more?
Right.
And isn't that really on me as the man? I'd really like to have you pick up some of that and have me pick up some of the family stuff. I really like to know my kids better.
Yeah.
That was never asked,
No.
and it needs to be asked. And so
Well,
that is the counter narrative.
okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I just was no, I absolutely love the direction you're going. And I think the hard part is, and I'm not trying to be negative here, but how do we actually start that conversation and get momentum behind it? Because you've got to understand the pendulum has swung so far beyond the stage of equality in many spheres, not all spheres, but many spheres or many areas, that how do we get it back under control and bring both sides to, because look,
The hope is with young men. The
okay.
hope is with young men. Young men, more and more, are saying, it's not all about money for me. That's not going to give me a happy life.
Yeah.
And I want to be, I want to be involved in my family. Being a father is hugely important to me. And so I think young men are going to, the men's movement with old guys like me, and I was young at one point in this movement. We're coming at it from an old and dusty place. But young guys, they grew up with this whole idea of a work-life balance. It's mostly women who are getting work-life balance, and it's mostly women who have the boss saying, yeah, it's okay if you go to the school play. But young men are beginning to demand it.
Mm-hmm.
And young women, I think, also are becoming more interested in having the kinds of husbands and the kinds of fathers for their kids who are like this. And so I see some hope that as women become more comfortable with their own careers and their own ability to have work-life balance, they will not be so resentful about what men have had, and they will be willing to share and will in fact recognize that it's essential for their own good to share these benefits with women. Now, do I think that young men and young women are going to achieve nirvana anytime soon? I don't, because the real test for this idealistic view I have, where the rubber meets the road, is what happens in a divorce. And I don't have much doubt that many young women, even the young millennial women who were very supportive of having work-life balance for their husbands, I don't have any doubt that many of those young women will take full advantage of the biases against men in divorce courts. And I don't think that there are going to be a whole lot of women out there campaigning hard for laws that stipulate that we're going to have a rebuttable presumption for joint custody in any divorce case.
Yeah.
The term rebuttable presumption?
Rebuttable presumption?
It's called a rebuttable presumption. The idea of rebuttable presumption, even if you don't know the term. In criminal court, we have a rebuttable presumption of innocence for the accused. You're innocent until proven guilty. Well,
and yet how many people go into criminal court with the jury, the judge, possibly even both attorneys on both sides, presuming even in their mind without saying it that, oh yeah, this dude is guilty as sin.
Yeah, especially if we're talking about a man, as you pointed out at the beginning of the show, men are more likely to get longer sentences for the same crimes, even with the same criminal records. But let me just put in a word for a particular piece of my heart here.
Yeah.
Who really gets it? Black men. Because if a white man is suspected of being evil, black men are suspected of being even more evil.
Oh,
because they're not only evil because they're men, they're also suspected of being evil because they're black. And so those guys really have it bad.
Yeah. They're
So-
probably the most discriminated against class overall, regardless
Yes.
of what society might tell us. I truly believe.
Now, I think
Yeah.
we also need to recognize that American Indians, I spent a little bit of time on the Navajo reservation and near the Navajo reservation in Arizona. And American Indians, Native American men, they are having a terrible time because many of the native tribes are matriarchal, and they're not really interested in having men telling them how to raise kids. And alcoholism is a huge problem on and near the reservation. So, but that's something I know less about. I know more and have dealt more with African American men, and I think they are just getting a horrible deal. And you know what the saddest part about this is, Jeff, is that they, for very good reason, they look at you and me and think a white guy, the man. He's the man who's keeping me down. We got to get over that too.
Yeah.
So the narrative piece about women have a lot of good things that men want and need, and they need to share them and stop pretending that we don't want them. When really we just avoid them because they have been painted pink.
Yeah. Now, do you think part of this is a problem of you can't hear what somebody doesn't say? Do you think we as men have not done a good enough job about speaking up for what we think we need in the past?
Yes, I think that, first of all, there's a book from years ago written by Warren Farrell called Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say, which made that essential point. I think one of the reasons men don't talk is, there are lots of reasons men don't talk, but one of the reasons men don't talk is because we're afraid. Another reason we don't talk is because we think it's probably true. When we hear about female supremacy, when we hear women subtly suggesting that they know better than we do in certain areas of life, we think, yeah, I'm just a man. I'm just a dog. I'm just a dog.
Fulfilling prophecies, though.
Yeah. People will live down to expectations.
Right. And you keep talking about how terrible you are. You're eventually going to become as terrible as you keep talking. I get it. I'm just,
Exactly. Yep. If I'm going to be treated like a dog, I might as well act like a dog.
Right.
So I think that there is a lot of, again, I do not mean to equate the problems of racism with what we're talking about here with men, because there are advantages to being a man.
Yeah.
There are no advantages to being black in America. Very few, anyway. Some people would say affirmative action is okay, maybe, or definitely in some ways. But help pick me up, because I lost my train of thought there.
No,
go ahead.
We were talking about, you started talking about how you don't mean to equate racism versus the obvious issues of race and race inequality.
Yes. So I don't mean to equate racism and anti-male sexism, but one of the reasons that a lot of bad things happened to blacks over the years, and one of the reasons blacks didn't rise up as early as they probably wanted to, one of the reasons, not the only reason, because the white society had guns and wasn't going to play. But one of the reasons also is that there is such a thing as internalized racism. A lot of folks think, I'm not going to do as well as the white man because I'm black, and it's a form of self-hatred. And I think there's a lot of internalized sexism that men face. Look, and there was internalized sexism that women had to overcome too, because back before the women's movement got rolling, there were women who would say, oh, I couldn't be a lawyer. I'm just a girl. I'm just a woman. I can't be tough and strong, argue like that. It's internalized beliefs of a negative nature about yourself.
But any man that's had a conversation or a confrontation with his wife might beg to differ with that.
Yes. Oh, you mean about arguing? Yeah, you're right.
Again, it goes back to the whole thing. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You say it enough to yourself and you become that which you fear. But I don't know. I guess I'm a little bit miffed at the fact that if we've known that this is an issue, why, I guess not so much miffed, but I'm confused. Why is it that obviously I'm 30, I just turned 37, and you have been dealing with this and working with this issue for a significantly longer period of time than I've even been aware that it was an issue. And I didn't become aware that it was an issue because partially I fell into that same trap. Yeah, my wife's better with the kids because she says she's better and because she's a woman, and women are just naturally better with kids. And it's, yeah, but God damn it, if I don't have some good shit to offer for my kids, like I push them harder than my wife does. I can do different things with them that she can't or won't or doesn't have any desire to do. And I don't know, I'm lost and at the same time confused and sad. And it's just, I'm going through this, like, even during this conversation, it's just like, why is it the way that it is? Like, why couldn't we have done something sooner? Why haven't I said something sooner? What could I have done? What could do we even have enough to make a dent? And so
even when the men's movement gets started, which doesn't show any immediate signs of happening, it's not going to start today, tomorrow, next week. Even when the men's movement gets started, it's going to take 50, 60 years because the women's movement has spent decades getting to where it is. So let's not lose heart about the fact that it's going to be a long, hard struggle. And let's take heart from the fact that there were a lot of very brave women at the beginning of the women's movement who put their in some cases, their physical safety on the line. We have to be courageous and take support in each other and link arms. And although men probably won't physically link arms because of that's pink. That's just too gay.
Again, stereotypes, and that's the thing. I mean,
exactly.
That's the kind of shit.
There are many insecurities that work against us. So again, they're not huge. They're not huge things that I think are doing the most damage to us, but many little ideas, little insecurities. There's also the fact that what's one of the things that most single men want in their lives? They want to get laid.
A woman.
Okay? They want to get laid. And it's a very strong, powerful drive. And it can sometimes overwhelm a man's sense of his need for integrity.
Yeah.
And so a lot of men, and I've been there in my younger days, I did a lot of stupid things to try to get close to women. And I did not always have the integrity I wished I had. That's a very strong reason to just pretend that women are wonderful and perfectly lovely and never do anything wrong or mean or selfish and always treat men and all living beings with love and care and tenderness. It's just not true. Men do mean selfish things, greedy things. Women do mean selfish, greedy things too. If you say that to a woman, if you have this discussion with a woman about fairness and equality between the sexes, you're probably not going to get laid. That's just the fact, unless she's a really cool woman who says, wow, you got some backbone, young man. I kind of like you. But I think a lot of women would much rather have the kind of man they can rock around their finger.
I think it maintains the status quo.
Yeah, which is what a lot of us are.
Yeah. I think there's some comfort in the familiar, even if the familiar is uncomfortable, I think there's more comfort in the familiar than there is in the unfamiliar. And that's part of the reason why why people haven't bothered to say anything or to speak up or to take action or to do anything. So,
yes.
Now,
Let me mention one more thing about this.
Yeah.
The opposite piece of the opposite end of the spectrum from what we just talked about, where men will allow themselves to be wrapped around a woman's finger. Well, that's one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, there are a lot of men who are just really angry and not at all happy with women. And rather than forthrightly speaking up and helping to get a men's movement started where men feel safe and they feel like they're not alone and they don't feel like they have a personal problem by talking about these things, men need to say, look, we don't expect you to like this, young lady, or women, or feminism. We don't expect you to like this, but you need to hear it because it's our reality. We're not saying it's always right, but you need to stop saying that you're always right. And let's have this negotiation that we should have had 60 years ago. Let's be fair to each other. And
like that.
As our society gets more and more stressed, maybe we'll see that these kinds of issues are at least a very big part of our problem.
Yeah. And I like what you said about how this is not us speaking from fact, other than the fact is this is our reality. You don't live in the minds and the bodies of a man, so how can you tell us what a man thinks, does, or otherwise? Other than what. And if we're not saying it, then you're not hearing it. So don't put words in my mouth. Listen to what I'm saying, and then you can understand where I'm coming from. And we're not always right, but nobody is.
What do we now hear a man is doing when he dares to try to explain something to a woman?
Mansplaining.
He's mansplaining.
I hate that term.
Right?
I hate that term with a passion.
Isn't it just a way to tell men to shut up?
Yes.
What is feminism other than 60 years of femsplaining? Feminism has been 60 years of femsplaining. Women telling us what our lives are like and how lucky we are. So I have a t-shirt. At least I designed it. It says, the one side of the t-shirt, the front says, the most sexist idea of all is the belief that only one sex is ever sexist. On the back, it says, feminism is only 50% correct. If you don't understand that, you're 100% wrong.
Yeah.
Feminism's half. And how great it'll be when we men contribute our half. Despite all of the objections and all of the pain and fury that we're going to endure, it'll be great when we feel safe in speaking what's true for us.
Yeah.
Having a nice, healthy, give and take conversation about it.
Yeah. Do you think what is the term for this? Gender politics?
Yeah, gender politics is a word. Sexual politics is an old one.
So I know that now with the non-binary stuff, maybe gender's not the right word to use. And I'm not trying to be insensitive. I just my belief on that whole change of mindset is a little bit different. I grew up with this. This is the way I think. Just because you feel a certain type of way doesn't mean I should change the way that I use my words, but I'll bite. Is it sexual politics?
Sexual politics.
Okay.
Yeah. I would like to...
Go ahead.
Oh, do we need to wrap up? I do have something I'd like to say about the whole gender binary thing.
No, we don't have to wrap up because look, we got all the time. I can edit out whatever we don't need to meet the time frame if we need to. So I want the goods, man. I want the information. Right. As it turns out, we are finished with time for this episode. We ended up having a whole lot more content than we thought for this one. So we are actually going to split it up into 2 episodes. So please join us for episode 8, where we continue this conversation with Jack Kammer. Guys, we'll catch you on the next one. Take care.